Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today, I'm with Michael Huth. Michael, can you give a brief intro about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So my name is Michael Huth. I am the head of Department of Computing at Imperial College, which is the leading university in the world. But I'm also a senior researcher and co-founder at an AI startup based in Berlin called Xayn.
That's pretty cool. So Michael, you're the head of the Department of Computing and also the dean at the Imperial College London. That's a really prestigious position. How did you get to that position? I think a lot of our viewers would love to know about your background and like your journey to become like the head of the department.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, Imperial has heads of departments more like little presidents, if I say. So it's a very strong federated system where the departments hold a lot of control over the strategic agendas, so on, which is partly the strength of Imperial, I would say. So this was quite a position to take on. But really, I come from a mathematics background, undergraduate mathematics. Then I went to Tulane to do a PhD in mathematics, so across the pond for that and then a couple of postdocs, US, UK, Germany, and then sort of moved more from mathematics into sort of algorithmic things, security, privacy, and then it was sort of a smaller step into AI, around privacy, and did a startup with one of my PhD students where I went part-time for a couple of years. And then at Corona, someone had to take on leadership in the department, and it seemed a good time to make that transition and not lose the connection with the startup.
Very cool. So for people who don't know, what is the term sovereign legal AI? What does that mean?
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess sovereign has sort of a bunch of meanings, really. So, I mean, for that startup and for their client base, it mostly means absolute reassurance and control over where data sits, where the cryptographic, secrets sit, who has control over them, who manages them. So there's a clear chain of custody, so to speak, for where all the tooling and the security sits. So, for example, in the legal domain, there are often territorial laws, that safeguard these kinds of client relationships. And so that's one interpretation of it. I would say for sovereignty, there's also a sort of a geopolitical sense of that, right? I mean, North America and China are sort of seen as, and rightly so, as leaders in AI development. But if you look at chip manufacturing or, the manufacturing of machines that manufacture chips, the geopolitics looks quite different, right? And so there's a lot of potential tension and some actual tension also around, assuring that you have, sort of like food security, that you have AI security, if I want to use that metaphor, right? So sovereignty also has this kind of sense, I would say.
Cool. Yeah. So I know that a lot of countries now are spinning up like their own AI act. Like I think, Europe had their own AI
Mm.
act that was signed in November of last year. December of last year, President Joe Biden from the States, he signed an executive order. What are you seeing in terms of like the different countries and nations reacting to AI and spinning up some type of legislation to regulate it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's a bit like with GDPR and the various state acts on privacy in the US and also some of the legislation in China around privacy. There are differences, but there's also a common core, I would say. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the AI summit that was in the UK in Bletchley Park last year, now the one in South Korea, this is a lot about having that sort of dialogue and identifying the commonalities, because I think it is almost like a Commonwealth type activity, yeah, where everyone has to be sort of in that boat and make sure that we have enough scope for commonalities. Because at the end of the day, AI products want to be sold around the world. And so we have to make sure that there is enough alignment, to actually have the economic growth that AI might enable.
Yeah. So what are some like key ethical concerns surrounding like the use of AI in like regulated industries such as like, for instance, law?
Yeah, so I mean, in law, it's very often if we just say, let's take the case of a law office. Yes, so they have clients for legal cases and so on. That's the confidentiality of the lawyer-client privilege. So that's one concern there. And that's not just an ethical one. That's actually a criminal code type thing, for example, in German legislation. And uh, and then there's also if you have large corporates, and their legal departments, this is part of the governance, of the ESG sort of concern. So they want to make sure that all the products that they're using there are really, consistent with their own governance and risk posture and so on. So that's, I think, for the legal domain, it's not just the lawyers, it's also the corporates that all have legal departments or, rely on partners that do that for them.
Cool. So what's your like point of view on like say like the challenges of developing and deploying language models in highly regulated industries like government or like healthcare?
Yeah. I mean, let's take the legal domain as an example. If you take something like a merger and acquisition thing, yeah. So these are often done in secure information rooms, physical infrastructure and so on. Information control is absolutely everything, right? You want to avoid leaks and so on. So if you want to have large language models within these premises, they really will have to be in these premises, right? And these large models, whatever they can learn from those interactions, that should stay within those rooms, right? So that's quite a different sort of way of thinking about AI and tooling and learning experiences and fine-tuning and so on. I mean, that might be an extreme case, but I think what we're beginning to see is quite a diversity of use cases of large language models, where the standard conception of just providing an API and having a bit of granularity of access control is actually not fit for purpose.
What's your like point of view on say like AI companies trying to balance innovation, uh, but still have the need to like adhere to like strict regulatory frameworks?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit like with anything in regulation, right? I mean, you want to push the envelope, and then you will understand the risks. You have all your legal advice and so on, just to see what you can afford. And if you enter a risk, you at least know how large it might be, and is that a calculable one, and so on. So I don't think this necessarily is very different from any other consideration, like around compliance in other aspects of running a large corporation. Innovation is certainly, I would say, even more of a pressing need in that sort of sector simply because of the sheer speed of how things develop, right? By the same token, I should say, I mean, I find that the speed of this innovation also tends to maybe have a bit more of a monoculture. Yeah, so we're looking always at very similar approaches. Everyone's kind of trying to do the same thing, raising more money to do it faster and with more compute. I'm not sure that's actually so healthy. Yeah. So if you look at things like XLSTM or these CAN networks and so on, these are very fresh intellectual ideas that might also help with managing sustainability much better, or having completely different ways of thinking of local networks and how to compose them, which might also help with explainability. So this sits mostly in the academic sector. So I think this is really also a call for industries and academia to just work much more closely together to get some of that diversity going.
Now, like given your background in cybersecurity and cryptography, like how do you integrate these fields into your like AI research and development?
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously a lot of research on, for example, differential privacy and these kinds of ideas, which is quite important, for example, in medical imaging, where you might have, I don't know, a handful of insurance companies, a handful of hospitals exchanging medical data around imaging and so on, where, the differential privacy on the local ends really give you that kind of reassurance and might also, appease any kind of regulator and their concerns. But there's also another sense of privacy, which is really more in the sovereign sense, as we discussed earlier, right? So the nuts and bolts of physical perimeters and also just being able to have all kinds of ISO type and other certifications around proper, information security practices within the organization that does the AI and so on. So this is really quite a holistic sort of thing. It's not just, can you actually do some cool pipelines for new LLMs? It's actually all the bells and whistles around that for the management of the assets and their security.
So in your opinion, what do you think is like the most pressing like threat right now with from AI systems? I mean, like for instance, I'll go first. Like
Yeah,
it's election year for a lot of countries,
right.
right? Especially in the States. We have election in November. I think there's gonna be a lot of like deep fakes, especially around like the political opponents. So there's gonna be a lot of like targeted like deep fake political ads that are going to be rising up pretty soon. In fact, I think there was a on the news there were like a pair of like uh, men that got into trouble by using a voice clone of President Joe Biden to like dissuade voters from going in. What do you think is like the biggest pressing issue with AI systems right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw this with Cambridge Analytica, I guess, was the first example that brought this into a wider sort of consciousness, of the general public. And now you have this acceleration of all this progress, like deep fakes and so on. I mean, I'm not sure if regulation will do the trick here, yeah, because regulation is quite sluggish and it's more reactive to things happening. I'm kind of wondering, I mean, this is almost more a sort of a citizen education thing, I mean, we all should know what to do when we do online banking, for example, right? And what things to safeguard and which scam patterns we might detect. I think we need similar sorts of things around the use of AI in media platforms and daily interactions on the web. Um, I mean, someone who has very hard political beliefs, is probably going to vote that way anyway. But I think it's the undecided ones or the ones that can be swayed, where these tools will really be very powerful and can actually undermine our democracies.
So I'm curious as to like how do you see like the role of like academia evolving in like the development of commercial AI solutions? Do you think that like a lot of the stuff that comes from academia is going to roll into like commercialization of AI products in the future? Or do you think that that's kind of a niche, nice to have, kind of fun to play around with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably going to be a bit of both. I mean, there might hopefully be some disruptive new thing, and it could actually be one of those new intellectual approaches, yeah, that might just sort of slice through the existing approaches in terms of the, cost reductions and, less energy and maybe also similar precision. So I think we don't do actually enough work in that kind of space. But also, LLMs have quite a few limitations and if you also think, I mean, this is being discussed, right? There's now sort of an operating system emerging around these LLMs, in terms of operating system type concepts. And there's actually some really interesting research that needs to be done, be it security, be it reliability, availability, some sort of multi-threading or the whole sort of socioeconomic aspects of platforms that have these sorts of things. So I think there, academia actually has a lot to offer and it wouldn't require these huge investments to actually deliver those kinds of things.
What inspired you to transition from academia to like co-founding an AI startup?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I always had this sense of adventure. Yeah, I mean, that's why I left the German university system and went to the States, and that was just an awesome, inspiring experience. And so I was always, after a couple of years, yearning for sort of a new experience. And in my mid 50s, when I had this PhD student who kind of talked about doing an AI startup quite early on in the PhD, I sort of listened to that and I had some input in that as well. But then, at some point I thought, hey, that's really a cool thing. And then after this was co-founded, he actually asked me shortly after, hey, do you actually want to join, as CTO? And so I thought, okay, that's a daring thing that I should probably do, and certainly haven't regretted it. Yeah, so I've learned so much there about startups and VC funding, how innovation works, all the difficulties, the bumps, and how to overcome issues and pivots and all that. And in fact, in my current role, this is super useful, yeah, because I actually can not just talk the talk, I can also understand when or whether people walk the walk. Yeah, to go exactly into this point that you were saying, how can we make sure that academic research actually transfers into this sort of world and has some real impact?
So can you share some insights from your research at like Imperial College London that kind of helped you with your startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the IP was actually really created within the company, to be sure. So, um, I mean, we had some work around privacy preserving protocols, where the idea is in federated learning, which is not what we currently do, is to say, could you actually have techniques that are a little bit easier to deploy than some of the existing protocols, and where those might also have patterns around them, right? And so we actually did an open source tool, a GitHub project, that actually gave us similar performance, just had a slightly alternative approach to that, more as a sort of an offer and a service to the community. Yeah, and there is now some traction in federated learning, especially around edge computing. So that was one thing I would say that we did at Imperial.
That's cool. So you actually grabbed some patents through tech transfer for your startup?
No, sorry. So what I meant was to say that, there is some concern, or at the time there was some concern in the community that some of the large IT companies might hold patents, yeah, that sort of restrict how you can actually use the things that are sort of out there. And so if you can develop something that is a bit more from scratch and actually make an Apache project or something out of it, you not only can use it and be assured that you can use it, but it's also something you can offer to the wider community.
Oh, that's cool. So what kind of like trends you see in your industry? Anything like noteworthy that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the trends for me in the industry are really about more community building. So the sovereignty is one trend, one sort of factor in this, I would say. Um, you will see probably certain countries or regions getting together and players in there to pool resources, yeah, to do maybe also some pre-training of large LLMs, and then have some sort of, decentralized inference capabilities maybe as well. And also, I think the large players are beginning to see that this is a very costly thing to maintain, right? So, I mean, you have also large AI startups trying to raise the next money for the next round. We're entering, amounts that are, significant portions of the US GDP, for example. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't strike me as a very healthy way of progressing. So I think that's one of the things we will begin to see. It will be more ecosystems that might also be based on sort of common values or geo-regional sort of affinities and so on. And I think that's actually a good trend, yeah, and will probably lead to more innovation in AI.
Yeah, like everyone right now is like building up like their own AI startup because in my opinion, I think a lot of the technology has become so accessible now
Yeah,
as opposed to where we were like maybe 2 years ago in the neural network field. So I think the accessibility has driven a lot of innovation and inspiration for people to start up their own AI startups like yourself. So like how do you balance your role as like an academic like leader and also but also like a business leader in the
yeah.
AI field?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, tough in the sense of actually living that, right? So, I mean, my role at the Imperial is really a managerial role, also helping to set strategy and so on, and where AI obviously is a big sort of factor in all of that. So in a way, I mean, I actually don't do that much research on the academic side. Yeah. So the free cycles that I have outside of my management role, I really reserve for the company. Yeah. And also for just keeping up in the commercial space of AI. So, and that is quite challenging because, as I said before, the department heads at Imperial are almost like little presidents. Everything goes over their desk. They're sort of like CEO, CIOs and a bit of COO. So it's a very complex role. Yeah.
So what's the future for you? Are you gonna maintain that dual role where you're at Imperial but then also at the startup? Like what's the future look like for you?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, certainly I want to be engaged in the startup, but also with Imperial. I mean, I'm sad to say I will actually leave Imperial in the summer to take on a new role as founding president of a newly established university in the Free State of Bavaria. This will really be the first German university in the age of the internet, in fact, and will be around convergent science in the age of AI. So, I mean, it's really a unique opportunity to build a university from scratch at this day and age, and I think that's super exciting, and I just can't wait to embark on that project as well.
Yeah, that's exciting. I know that a lot of universities are becoming a lot more like AI focused, right? So there's like in the states, the State University of New York, they have a program called like AI Plus, where they every single department is hiring an AI SME, like so regardless of what department that is. So that means that like if you're in humanities, you're gonna touch AI at some point
Mm,
in a course. If you're in biology, you're gonna touch AI. If you're in like business, you're gonna touch AI. So they put like a big emphasis on the fact that once you leave your formal training in higher education, when you enter into the workforce, like you will be touching AI. That's why they make that a priority. I'm seeing that I'm seeing that a lot of colleges now are implementing like AI into every single curriculum. Are you planning on doing kind of like the same thing?
Uh, yeah, there will be affinities to that. I mean, the founding concept was actually a commission that was sitting down for 2 years with also representation from Stanford and other international places, just to answer that question, what would a university today look like if you could build it? And so there will be only six or so departments. All the degrees will actually sit in a central school. All of them will have sort of AI things in it, as you say, but also all of them will have liberal arts and sort of genuine societal things in it because as we all see, the boundaries between traditional social type things and computational AI things are getting very blurry. Yeah? And a lot of the innovation actually happens when we understand how these things interplay. Yeah, so this also should be reflected in education. And also there will be activity fields, which are kind of strategic conversion science topics where people across departments and the student bodies will engage with them. Yeah, and something like yeah, responsible AI might be a good activity field. I mean, these have not yet been defined because the university is just really starting up.
So if anyone was like interested in like joining this university or like maybe learning more about your startup, like how they reach you?
Well, they can reach me by email is probably the easiest. They can check me out on LinkedIn or just send something to Michael at Xayn, that's Xayn, so that would be the startup one. Or the new university would be michael.huth@utn.de.
Cool. And then finally, like what type of advices would you give to aspiring AI researchers and people who are interested in entrepreneurship, looking to make an impact in like a regulated industry?
Hmm. Yeah, I actually had some people at the Dublin Tech Summit this week, after I spoke, come up with these sorts of questions to me. And a question I hear a lot is, should I do a PhD? Yeah, if I want to go into AI. And I think this is one of the questions where the answer might actually change. Yeah, so I mean, those who want to go into, the top AI companies still feel compelled to do a PhD, and they probably have to, right? But I'm kind of wondering with all this, as you were saying, accessibility of AI tools and this sort of changes in this landscape, whether that's really something that will be needed in a couple of years' time. Yeah, so my advice is often, well, maybe just go to a startup that does some cool R&D and just learn the ropes. And the smaller the better, maybe because you will be back end, will be DevOps, you will do all sorts of things. And then hopefully there will also be some design or ethical people in there, so you get to learn about that too. And then you just kind of mature technically and in other aspects. And maybe a PhD is not actually very essential to become entrepreneurial and successful at that in AI in the medium to long term.
Well, thank you, Michael, for being on the show. And until next time, stay curious.
Tony, my pleasure.